Is anyone here?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. We're 4 minutes past the hour. So today on the agenda, we've got a couple of items from Hemant, finishing up on volume resizing. And Dimitro has an item that he wanted to discuss. And then last, we can talk about the CSI 1.3 release. So maybe Dimitro, you can kick it off.
Yeah, I think it doesn't take much time. Could you please follow this link? Oh, let me share my screen maybe.
Sure.
Yeah, there is an issue which was raised like 2 months ago regarding create volume request with empty capacity range. And at that time, we had a discussion, and at final discussion on meeting, we said that we need to reward a little bit the wording of errors in the error table for this request. And I've just created the PR for this with small updates. And I have like 2 points. The first point is I would like to ask you to take a look at it, maybe review it quickly. And second point is I checked that I need to sign contributor agreement, CLA, but I just found PDF and no instructions where I need to send that PDF with agreement, with signed agreement, etc. It's not little bit not clear. How can I sign CLA? And I think that's it.
Okay, sounds good. So for the CLA, let me send you a link real quick. Basically, what we need you to do is email it to a specific address, and that should be documented. Okay. So I'll post the link into the chat window. I'll also post it into the agenda. So feel free to send the CLA there, and then we can help review this PR. Any other questions, concerns, or comments about this?
Oh, no, thank you. I'll come back after signing CLA. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thank you. All right, next up is Hemant, and we have the volume expansion discussion. Go ahead, Hemant.
Hello. So yeah, let me try to find. I had to.
Hemant, your volume's too low.
Is this better?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Let me try to share my screen. Okay. Where did it go? Sorry. Okay. Hopefully you can see my screen. I'll just try to minimize this. Okay. So there are two PRs for volume expansion. One was that declare volumes plugin's ability to declare offline online expansion capability as deprecated. So I see some comments that Saad left yesterday night actually. So it all looks fine to me, I think, unless like, is there anything worth? And I think I think this looks like what we agreed, and it looks fine to me. I don't have anything else to add to this. I'll address these comments and I will respond. Okay, should we just remove comments on online, offline? So it looks like minor thing actually. So it's not. It's something I could fix it by in 1 hour or so. Is there anything anybody wants to add to this one before I go to the next one, which seems like the more like the trickier one?
Yeah, if James or G could also take a look at this, that would be great.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll take a look at that.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
the next so the next one is the where did it go? Okay. So originally I just wanted to add like we wanted to add a read only error on the node expand call that if the volume is read only, then expansion is not supported by this plugin. So that's what we added. And but last time in last call we discussed that, okay, what if a plugin driver wants to do offline node expansion? That is it, like there's a case of like it only supports expansion after node stage and before node publish, but not after node publish. So that's the use case that Saad was worried about. And I tried to make language change here. Let me just try to hide the comments for now. That a plugin that has stage unstage node capability and support node expand volume only after node stage and before node publish, but not after, may return failed precondition error code. If node expansion is called after node publish volumes, you must not retry if volume is node published. The idea is that on this node, the volume on this node, because volume is already node published, uh, it's already too late to call node expand volume unless you wants to unpublish and retry. So that is the so that's the tricky bit. And so you can obviously try expansion node expand volume on another node after node stage and before node published, but maybe not on this node. So that was my intent in making this change. And Shad has left a comment that that adds the language to say that, okay, it could be tried with exponential backoff, but we previously said that volume in use error, at least for node expand volume, is basically on that node is there's no way to retry it on that node. The only way you can retry is it on another node. And so it does not make this scenario of like offline or as like after only like it's not possible. It just means that it's not possible on this node. But so Saad is saying here that does this mean did you mean to say you must not retry if volume is node published, because that means offline is not supported. So yeah, it's not supported it's not possible on this node, you try on another node. But there's a problem with the language or the wording of how the flow documents this thing. So the spec says if plugin has stage unstage volume node capability, then node expand volume must be called after successful node stage volume. Node expand volume may be called before or after. So the problem with this language is that a CO like Kubernetes does call node expand volume after node stage. So if a plugin wants to support offline only, then it will just work. Like it will return volume in use error after node publish, and so Kubernetes will not try to call expansion after node publish, but it does call on the first mount, so it works. But another CO may read this language that CO node expand volume may be called before or after, and choose that, okay, I'll just always call node expand volume after node publish. And in that case, for the plugins that don't permit expansion after node publish, this offline case will not work basically. So I was thinking about it, and there are two options. And also I was like so explain I this is exponentially retrying with the recovery with the back off is not something that is think is good, because it means that the CO must unpublish the volume, or if volume is read only, make it read write. Is not something we want to make a spec change for that. So I was thinking there are maybe two options. One is that make no spec change for offline expansion, but the downside is that another CO may interpret this spec differently and implement call to node or expand volume only after node publish volume, and plugins who depend on Kubernetes behavior might not work on a different CO, or Kubernetes itself might actually change the behavior, who knows. The another is that make the language change around this line that says node expand volume may be called before or after node publish volume, and make it look like it is desirable to call node expand volume after node publish to permit expansion of volume, which only permit expansion after node stage and before node publish and not after node publish. So change this line to expand this line to say that, okay, although CO can may call after, before, or after, it's recommended that CO calls node expand volume before node publish volume to support use case of plugins that require only support expansion after stage and before publish. So yeah, and the other thing was like, I don't know of any plugins that need this use case right now. At least I know it's there could be. I could send a questionnaire to community meeting list and ask if there are any plugins that depend on this on offline. So yeah.
So I think the concern that I had was the existing language kind of says if you do stage on stage, we're going to call you, after node stage, before, but could be before or after node publish.
Yeah.
And then we added in language around the volume in use to say, if you don't support being called in use, return this error code. And then we also told the CO, if you get this error code, just never retry.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like this kind of confusing set of signals that we're sending saying, you could do offline if you're a CO if you want to, and here's the order in which you decide to do offline. But you have no way to discover whether a given plugin requires offline. The only way to discover that is through this error code. But oh, if you receive this error code, don't retry.
Yeah.
So effectively what we're saying is either the CO must always do offline or never do offline.
Yes. Sorry.
No, go ahead. So I think that's basically my concern.
So either CO must always call node expand volume after node stage and before node publish, and obviously it can call after, like the pod is running and the workload is running, it can call node expand volume after node publish as well if the plugin supports it, or if the plugin doesn't throw volume in use error, so it can keep calling that workflow. But I think that we already call we already allow calls to node expand volume after node stage and before. So I understand that confusion that okay, a plugin may like there's no way to see or to discover, okay, when should I call it, and that's the problem, and that's why I was thinking that maybe it might be worth changing this language so that CEO does not have to guess that, okay, when to call. Like the spec says that, okay, call after, if it has stage on stage, just call after node stage.
Could such a change be made in a backwards compatible way?
Yeah, so.
Because I mean, if we're going to break backwards compatibility, we may as well just say, always call after node publish and forget about calling after node stage. Make everyone's lives simpler.
Yeah, except, so what do we do about, yeah, that will make everyone's life simpler. And so what do we do about the plugins that do want to support, like what Sai is saying, the offline only expansion, where they support only expansion?
I'm still a little confused on what we consider to be offline, because we were talking before the meeting about Xing's use case, and you said in her case, when she means offline, what she actually means is before controller publish, not before node publish.
Yeah.
So like presumably she doesn't care, you know, it is about the node publish node stage distinction. And I don't know if anybody prefers the call before node publish but after node stage. Like I understand some people prefer before controller publish.
Right, but when we still need to do the file system resize, right? So this was called eventually. So
Right, but that
right
portion
now,
of it,
when is that called right now? I'm not sure actually.
It's called like it's called after it's called after node stage. So if you support node stage, unstage, it will be called after node stage.
But then is that before node publish or is not sure? I guess that's the part that I'm actually not sure exactly when.
It will be called before node publish.
Okay, so if you change it, then it could breaks.
At least Kubernetes calls it before node publish.
Okay, yeah, so I don't think you should change that behavior now. You don't even know who you're going to break. Right?
Well, but my specific question is, Xing, you need to do your part of your resize while it's not published to any node, but once that part is done, the file system resize portion can be done whether it's published or not, right? As long as it's staged.
That I'm not sure, right? Because if it's always called after stage and before publish, then I don't know if you always call after publish, it will still work because that part is never tested. Because right now the code path.
Well, the spec says
right?
you must work after node publish if you implement node expand. You have no control on the SP side when it gets called, so you have to support both.
Yeah, but then since the current implementation is called in between, then I'm not really sure because that code path never tested.
Okay, well,
let me expand on that. From the first mount, to support the use case of the plugins that might only support expansion after node stage, it gets called on first mount after between node stage and node publish. But there's another reconciliation that happens that also calls node expand volume after node publish, like when you, for example, you have a workload running on a node and you expanded your volume. In that case, it's already staged, it's already published, and in that case
that's online case, right? That is online. That will not be,
that would only happen if you did an online expansion.
Yeah, that's okay. So that does not affect. I'm just worried about it. It's going to break the existing case, but if it doesn't break the existing case, then yeah.
It would be a backwards incompatible change to
change it.
Say COs must always call it after node publish, but it would, but just to start doing it after node publish always would still follow the spec. It might break plugins that don't follow the spec. But I don't know. I'm starting to wonder if this distinction of like when you call it on the node side really matters. Like I understand that there's a distinction on when you call the controller side because it can matter there. But I'm yet to find a case where someone actually wants you to call the node side before the publish versus after the publish, because after the publish seems ideal in every case.
Yeah, so I'm leaning towards that as well. We don't have any like plugins that particularly want this behavior of sandwiched calls between. I mean, there might be plugins that depend on it because Kubernetes does call it, but
right, but they would be not spec compliant if they did. Right? They'd just be depending on Kubernetes behavior.
Yeah. So the spec says a plugin, if supports node expand volume, it must support after node publish. It's
yes.
Yeah. So I think, yeah.
So I don't know. I would love to change the wording there to stop doing it before node publish, I think.
Yeah. So we can talk about that maybe in this thing, but I think for this distinction, like, so just trying to understand, like are there any plugins? There aren't any plugins, or are there any plugins that, okay, that
Well, one thing we could do is add tests to CSI Sanity that check whether this case is supported, because the spec says it should be, and then tell everyone to run CSI Sanity.
Oh, hold on. If you change it, then does that mean that my jar will be broken?
Well, you said
Or
you
you are
don't know.
not? No,
I
no.
mean,
He was saying right
if your
now,
driver,
no, in my case, I'm not talking about online, but in my case right now, it's always called after stage, but before publish. That's what Haman was telling me in my case.
right?
Because
But,
for me,
but
but then
the
if you
spec
change the
says
language, then, but
no. He's not talking about changing the language. He's just talking about changing the implementation. If your
yeah,
driver
that's the thing.
complies with
Then
the spec, you would not
if you
break.
change it, then that's going to break, right? Because that's
No.
not,
So
yeah.
my understanding is that if you do the offline case where you bring down the pod first and then resize it and then start a pod, that is the case when node resize, or when the resize is going to be called before node publish. But
Right.
if you had the scenario where you do the online resize where the pod is still running, then in that case, the the resize is going to get called after publish. So,
but the spec doesn't make
Yeah.
that guarantee. That's an implementation in Kubernetes.
yeah, and the spec does not make a guarantee that the spec says basically plug or storage providers to handle node expand volume after may be called before or after. So a storage provider must be prepared to handle both the cases.
And if it is the case that somebody can't do it, and that such a change would break them, then maybe we shouldn't make the change. Maybe we should make the spec change to give this guarantee because it might matter. But I'm suggesting that I can't imagine a case where this particular distinction would matter.
Well, the things you don't know, right? You could just, after you do that, you could break a lot of drivers.
Right. Well, and that's why my proposal was maybe we put a test in CSI Sanity that checks if the driver conforms to the spec in this specific way, so everyone can run the test before we actually change Kubernetes.
Yeah, I think the
Yeah, I
best,
think so. Yeah, probably it's better that you test this first before you make this dramatic change, and then make everyone break. Or a lot of
yeah.
people.
So I think the best, or like the option that we have is to not make a spec change to codify the offline expansion behavior. And yeah, so like I was saying, the downside is that like this change is as such Kubernetes doesn't need it, but or maybe other CEOs need it for. So the thing is that if a plugin depends on the Kubernetes behavior, okay, it'll always call node expand volume between node stage and node publish. So in that case, and a different CEO comes along and reads the spec differently, and always calls node expand volume after node publish. So on that CEO, the plugin might break. That's the concern, and that's the reason this spec, this particular language needs a modification.
So can I try to summarize a little bit?
Please.
We have offline, I think Ben brought up a good question. What does offline on node expand even mean? And it sounds like the consensus is offline means if you support node stage, then it gets called between node stage and node publish. Then assuming that, the next question is, how do we support offline? And you kind of have three gradients of support. One is that you don't support it at all. The spec says that node expand is always called after node publish. The CO always calls it after node publish. That's it. No ifs, ands, or buts. It's very clear. It's crisp, but offline is not supported. If a plugin doesn't like that, they can return an error code, but the CO effectively just doesn't retry. It doesn't change the behavior. It just doesn't keep calling it. I think Xing's argument is that although that may be legal per the existing word of the spec, because the implementation today is different, it may break people. So if we're going to pursue that path, let's add it to CSI Sanity first to make sure we don't break people, let them fix it, and then update the spec in the implementation. So that's the first most extreme option. On the other end of the spectrum, we can leave it as is and effectively let the volume plugin decide if they support online or offline by implementing stage. If they implement stage, then we ensure that, or the CO must call expand between node stage and node expand, but not after.
Well, how is that a less extreme option? Because that's a change to the spec wording.
I mean, I'm saying this is the other extreme, and it is also, you know, it's extreme because it's requiring a change to the wording of the spec that is actually backwards incompatible.
Yeah, okay.
Potentially. The benefit of this approach is that you give the plugin the option to choose whether they want online or offline by implementing node stage. And then I guess the middle option is kind of the hand wavy one where we say, let's leave the spec as is, but add in an error code. And then if the error code is returned, we can either do nothing or we can tell the CO that the CO can, you know, try to modify its behavior. I don't like that option. I think we should be very crisp about when node expand is going to be called. I prefer option number one, which is forget offline. Let's just not support offline on the node expand side and make it very clear in the spec. But I agree with Xing's concerns that doing so might break plugins. So it would have to be a slow process of first, let's add it to CSI sanity tests. Then actually we could probably update the spec and CSI sanity at the same time, but delay the change on them on the Kubernetes side, maybe one release just to make sure.
I thought the benefit of option number one is it didn't require a spec change.
It doesn't require it requires a slight spec change in that it would be a tightening, right? Currently the spec says if you allow, it's up to the CO to determine whether it's between node stage and node publish or after node publish. And we would eliminate that option and say basically, as a CO, you must always call it after node publish, regardless of whether node stage is implemented or not.
Well, that's kind of backwards incompatible because if there was another CO that wanted to call it before node publish, they would become invalidated.
Correct. But I don't think we are aware of any implementations on the CO side that do that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's a practical problem, but it's still technically not a backwards compatible change. The thing I wanted to throw out is I'll be very surprised. I do think we need to make a test case so people can validate that their drivers conform with today's wording of the spec, because some might not, and they just depend on Kubernetes behavior for correctness. But I'll be very surprised if anyone comes back after that and says, like, not only does my driver break, but like I can't support this flavor of after node publish. Like I could imagine there being bugs in drivers today, but I can't imagine the bugs being unfixable. If that makes sense. Like
we don't know, right? That's the thing. I think we should have some tests first. Otherwise, we really don't have the tests.
The CSI sanity test. Okay, so So we have to eliminate the wording, okay, that it may or may before, and we want to just say, okay, it'll be called after. And in an ideal, there may be the spec implies that the driver must support after node publish volume because CU is independent to. So what we're basically saying is that the spec implies that it has to support before or after node publish volume. But there could be drivers which dependent on Kubernetes behavior that, okay, I'll only support after node stage. So they might break if we change the spec or we tighten the wording in the spec.
No, they might break if COs just do what the spec says and call it after node publish, which is legal today.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to think like let's like forgetting the how Kubernetes does. It's like how backward compatible the spec changes, like the CSI spec changes. We are trying
So
to.
what if we change the word may to should? So it would say node expand volume should be called, and then we just drop before. So we say node expand volume should be called after node publish volume. So that's a wording change that maybe is a little more subtle, right? Should is still an optional thing, but it also carries with it like the weight of, recommendation. Like if you want to be the most compatible, then you will do things that are labeled as should, right? And then pair that with a CSI sanity check that validates the should behavior, the recommended behavior, right? So again, that second line would say node expand volume should be called after node publish volume. It's a slight change to the spec. Should still implies optional, right? So maybe if you squint really hard, it's not a breaking change, right? And then the CSI sanity check can test for the recommended behavior. Does that maybe make people less queasy?
I like that option. And I don't even think you got to squint. Just changing a may to a should doesn't break anything as far as I'm concerned.
But we're also dropping before word, right?
Well, yeah, but still, like, should be called after kind of means the same thing, except it has the weight of a recommendation behind it, right?
Then what are you going to change in Kubernetes side, Aman?
Sorry. We'll roll it out like in one release, we'll have captured in release notes. It shouldn't affect any plugins actually, implementation change in Kubernetes, to be honest, because the Kubernetes, the way it works is like if node stage was after node expand volume is called between node stage and node publish, it didn't work, then it will retry. It will actually not retry, but it assumes that, okay, it may only support a plugin may not implement node stage. Kubernetes also implements a kind of a fake node stage. We don't know like if it truly supports node stage at that point. So we call node expand volume after node publish as well. So so if for plugins that don't support, for example, node stage, so we call node publish. We call node expand volume after node publish. So we'll have to make a release note change that we're changing the behavior that will be always be called after node publish. But that's something I think we'll have to capture in release notes as a
What about what about that case? If it's the first time it's get mounted, are you going to change that or still stay the same? I guess that's what I'm most concerned about because I think that's the use case that I have.
The first time it's when it mounted, it'll be always called like as node expand volume is always called as part of the mounting operation. So
it's like after stage, right? Is it always called after stage?
So
but before publish?
It's called after stage and before publish. But if we make the spec change that we are talking about, then as part of this, the mounting operation itself will have to eliminate the code, or will eliminate the code where it gets called after stage, and will call after publish, but it will be in the same mount routine. So mount operation will not complete, the pod will not start until like the expansion is also finished. Does it make sense?
Okay, yeah, I guess that's the part that I'm not sure if, since that,
Right.
yeah, that coding change.
And we won't make that Kubernetes change until after we have CSI sanity tests to let you validate that you will be compatible with the new behavior. So you can test it and tell us if you're not.
Okay. Yeah.
And just to be clear, Hemant, on the Kubernetes side, you said that the order of operations will be guaranteed such that node expand is only called after node publish, but the pod would not be started necessarily.
Yeah.
But if the pod is already started, would you call node expand while the pod is started?
Yes, we do.
That's the online case.
That's the online case. And if
Okay.
the only difference that will be there is that if a plugin supports returns volume in use error, then it will not be retried. So the just to mount operation, we call it node stage, call node expand, we call node publish. We again call this is if plugins did not did not had node stage. So we call node expand after. This is the mount operation, and there's a resize reconciliation, like, which is a different thing that does the online processing. So in that case, it just calls a volume is already node published, so it calls node expand regardless of what node stage you implement or not.
Okay, I think I'm okay with that option. Basically reword to say node expand volume should be called after node publish volume. In addition, have an error code that if the SP doesn't support this behavior, they can return an error code. If the CO sees this error code, they stand down, they don't retry. The benefits of this are that this is a more subtle change. It could be rolled out slowly by having a CSI sanity test, first check for this behavior and start enforcing it. And then sometime later implementing this on the Kubernetes side. On the Kubernetes side, the behavior is if the volume is already in use, node expand is called immediately. If the volume is not mounted, not in use, then node expand will be called after the next node publish, but before the pod is started.
Yeah.
Anyone have concerns? Sorry.
Do you know? So when you implemented this, why did you decide to do the node expand right after stage or before publish? Is there any, any use case before, because some driver wouldn't work if you do it after? I'm just wondering, when you made the decision earlier, is there any reason?
Yeah. So the major reason was like, originally we wanted to support, or like how in Kubernetes we had only offline expansion actually. Now we are moving towards like where we are saying we are like only online, but originally it was only offline. Like, so
right,
could
but
not
that's
expand.
the case, then yeah, but then that means that you would still break the offline case, right? If you do this change.
No, we are not breaking it. It just means that this will not be called like this will not be called here,
right? But
and it will be called here, but it will be still part of the operation, mount operation. But I was just trying to tell you why we made this sandwiched call. It was because originally we wanted to support only offline, and in that case it was fine to call it sandwiched. But right now there's a case where there's just too many workflows like we want to support, and is it's good to have the clarity in the spec that, okay, if you want to support node expansion, it's best you should support it after node publish.
Okay, I guess I should. Okay, I'm still not sure that since you made
So
that decision, I would seems to me that if you do that after, then that means offline expansion will not work anymore. That seems to me since you made that decision earlier. So
Yeah, I think
yeah,
Xing's argument is valid. Basically, if you have a volume plugin that expected to, be called between node stage and node publish, effectively it was getting that behavior from Kubernetes today, and in the future, this might break them. And if this was a use case that we wanted to support in the past, we should be careful before breaking it. I think the consensus is, yeah, we don't want to support this use case anymore. This is a breaking change, but it's a subtle breaking change in that technically the spec said this shouldn't break you in the past. So you should support being able to, as an SP, have this node expand called after node publish. But just to be careful, we're going to add a CSI sanity test first to kind of warn folks, and then update the implementation so it's not a complete surprise. But yes, effectively what we're saying is we are deprecating this old behavior of node expand between node stage and node publish. If ASP depended on that, they'll no longer get that in the future.
yeah, that's true. So yeah, though if us be dependent on this behavior, then they were not being strictly compliant, but at the same time, yeah, Kubernetes was supporting it. So
yeah, I think the spec, CSS spec has that language because of this, right? So
the use case was there weren't any plugins. I would say that's why we added. I added the change sandwich. It was more like because it was offline only initially, and it made life easier to do between stage and publish. But obviously, like it's when we changed to online, it just makes less sense. There are other problems with also like the offline one of the bug that Michelle has pointed out, for example, is like if you have like two workloads running on a node and you delete and restart one workload, and you maybe support only offline for that one. But assuming like if it has stage unstage, then obviously the unstage will not be called, only node unpublished will be called for that workload. So in that case, like it will be like so there are two workloads that are using the same volume. So the one workload got deleted and restarted, the other or moved deleted and restarted. So it will also expand the volume for another different for the same volume on same node, but the other workload, because it will cause the mount operation trigger. All the nodes stage will not be called because volume was staged, but at least node publish will be called, and then it could call node expand potentially in that case. So online expansion is more saner in that sense. Like it will not lead to the problems like this.
So we've only got like 12 minutes left.
Okay.
Yeah, so does anybody have a concern with this? We're basically going with an option number 4, which is we are deprecating the behavior of allowing the CO to call node expand between node stage and node publish. Instead, we're effectively saying that COs should only call it after node expand in all cases. And
Well, I wouldn't call that a deprecation. I'd call that a recommendation.
strong recommendation, yes, plus a CSI sanity test and a Kubernetes.
The CSI sanity test will check for the reverse.
And fail if it sees the reverse.
Hold on, let me. No, okay, you're right. You're right. Yes, the sanity test should check for what the respect says you should do.
So the sanity test will check it will call node expand volume always after node publish and check if a plugin breaks. If it breaks, then it will report an error.
Yeah, and that would be a valid test without changing any spec wording. But we want the spec wording to go in for clarity's sake.
Right. And then I guess the real deprecation part is on the Kubernetes side because it would change its behavior at some point. Currently, if you have node stage, Kubernetes calls node expand between node stage and node publish. In the future, Kubernetes would just do it always after node publish. That is the potentially breaking part, but hopefully the CSI sanity test can be enough of a signal for people that it doesn't break them.
119 will make announcement, will add a capture and release note. We are not changing any behavior, so there's no action needed, but it's
Right.
yeah.
Okay, any objections to this plan?
So this, okay, sorry.
Well, I'm always your concerned.
Sorry, Shing, did you say you were concerned?
Right. I'm concerned because this could mean that our driver won't work anymore.
How will it not work it anymore, Zing? Because it will still call before workload starts after node publish, node expand.
Well, but you're going to change it that you always call after node publish, right?
Yeah, but
only after we verified that you're not broken. If you are broken, like we can have another discussion about this. And
do we have to wait to go and verify that before we make the change?
I think we can make the spec change and the CSI sanity change immediately, and we should hold off on the Kubernetes change until any interested parties have an opportunity to run the new sanity test. And then if there's a problem, like we should talk about it. But I don't think there will be. I think.
So assuming there is a problem, what would we do anything different?
Well, we would need to understand why it matters on the SP side that you call it before node publish, because in my mind it shouldn't, and it's just a matter of implementation.
Yeah, but given that this was coded this way before on purpose, so I do have a concern that it might be a problem.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
I think it's
there is a possibility that your existing driver doesn't conform to the spec, and this test will uncover that fact, and you'll have to fix it. But we would wait for that to happen before we just went and pushed a new version of Kubernetes that broke you.
What I'm concerned about in that case is that we go and make a spec change right now, and then at that point we discover we break someone, we have another big discussion, and then we decide to make another set of changes to the spec. That would be a really bad place to be. So
can you just add sanity test first without making any spec change, without making any coding change? Just do sanity test first and figure out what is the current situation before making any decision, because that could potentially change our decision, right?
So this does lead into the next topic, which is when are we going to cut the 1.3 release? Because we do have volume health changes waiting. We had said that it would be this week.
Sad, just a second. So, we could wait for the CSS sanity test change, and that's fine. But do we agree that the read-only change here was that, okay, volume in use read-only, our caller must not retry? That was with this language. Is that acceptable to everyone? Like the whole offline, I want to hold on that as well. So basically, the read-only change is volume in use or read-only, and it says it adds read-only to wording here, and it adds a line here that if a plugin does not support expansive read, it may return failed recondition error code, and CU must not retry.
I don't have any concerns with the read-only change. My only concern would be, let's not break this into kind of multiple sets of changes that go out over multiple CSI releases. All the expansion changes we want to make, let's make sure that we're confident in them and make them once.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably okay. It just does mean that we cannot change things in. So we don't depend on the offline change as such to, like, for an offline nodes change in the CO, like at least in Kubernetes. But for read-only change, we do kind of block on the spec change, where we get there and we say, okay, it's a read-only volume. We're passing the flag, and the plugin is saying it does not support read-only. But if the decision is, okay, we'll hold off on all those things, then that means that we will not resolve the expansion of read-only volumes in Kubernetes.
Yeah, I think it sounds like in order to address these concerns, what we're saying is let's make the CSI sanity change first, figure out if there's any plugins that break. If there are any plugins that break, then we can come back and have another discussion about how to proceed with that. I think that's a perfectly fine plan, except that if there are CSI changes required after that next discussion, if there are no CSI changes required, great. You know, we can make changes now. But if there will be future changes required, I would say let's hold off on these changes until we come to a consensus. And so what I'm implying is, let's go ahead and cut 1.3 without the volume expansion changes. Let's get the volume health changes out, and then continue in parallel to figure out if these proposed changes are going to work for volume expansion. If they do, we can do a 1.4 next quarter with these volume expansion changes. It means a delay by a quarter.
All right, so we're talking about, okay, so we are going to make the CSI sanity test change to check the node publish, node expand volume, and then are we also planning to solicit some feedback on the mailing list, that, okay, who is depending on that, or just the
That would be a good idea as well, I think.
It would be good to have the new CSI sanity test, so you could send the mail that just says, hey, please run this test if you have any worries at all, and let us know if it fails.
Right.
All right. That sounds fine to me.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and start the process of cutting a 1.3 without the expansion changes, just with volume health. And then we can go ahead and make the CSI sanity changes whenever, and do a follow-up email to say, hey, these changes are coming. If you're concerned, please run CSI sanity, and heads up, they're going to be part of CSI 1.4. We can cut a 1.4 in the next quarter and have that in the subsequent Kubernetes release. I think the changes are pretty much all agreed on. The only point of contention is this change in offline node expand behavior. So we're almost there. And the only reason we're being super cautious here is because I don't want us to get into a situation where we keep having to come back and make changes for node expand to the CSI spec. Let's just do it once and hopefully get it right. It's a very, very difficult thing to do, but I think if we take our time, we're more likely to get it right. So let's do that.
Yeah, I know it's been difficult, but yeah, I think it sounds sensible.
Okay, so then next item is build is broken. Hemant, you want to talk about that?
I think not much, basically, just the gRPC dependencies we don't pin, so I think it breaks if more new commits are pushed to the gRPC branch.
And then Ben, you had an item about controller publish unpublish.
That can wait. There's no urgency around that. It was just something that's been rattling around in my head. If we have time to
Okay.
discuss it.
Cool. We'll delay that to the next meeting. I think that's it. Then we can actually finish on time. Thank you everyone for your time, and apologies that this takes so long. I'm glad we're coming to a consensus though. All right.
Sounds
take
good.
care.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.